prepared
you heard
as
my
appropriate
question.
to share.
You heard my question, correct?
We'll be very careful in carrying.
NDP member Matthew Green destroys Bill Blair, the Minister of Preparedness. Matthew calls him the Minister of Unpreparedness as he wasn't ready for the protest in Ottawa. Matthew Green yet again asks for notes on the Emergency Act invocation. Bill Blair states no one took notes. What responsibility does Bill Blair take? Things get really heated. This was an awesome question, period. Here's the clip.
Green, 5 minutes.
Thank you. Minister, you're the minister. You're with us today as the Minister for Emergency Preparedness. When did you first become aware of the security threat, and when did preparations officially begin?
First of all, we were aware, Mr. Green, that there was going to be a protest. That protest quickly manifested itself into something much more than a lawful, peaceful protest, and took on elements of criminality and occupation, and the presence of those vehicles. Our officials continued to update us on a very regular basis as to the efforts of law enforcement
Minister,
to properly resolve it.
When did you first become aware that there was a security threat? We have reports publicly that the Integrated Terrorism Response Center briefed on the potential for ideologically motivated extremists. There are emails that have been made available between the National Capital Commission and the Ottawa Police that were back and forth about the nature of this. As the Minister for Emergency Preparedness, when did you first become aware that this could be a security threat, and when did you begin your preparations? I'm just looking for a date, sir.
And I don't have that date in front of me. At the very earliest, in the very earliest stages of this protest and then occupation and the work of our officials, I was being regularly briefed. I have the benefit of briefings from our officials, and they were apprising us of their work. They were not seeking operational direction at that time, but I was receiving information about security concerns related.
Would you be willing to share those briefings with this committee, sir, for the clarity that we could perhaps contemplate them in camera?
Unfortunately, Mr. Green, those were verbal briefings to me, and I can only provide you with my recollection.
And you don't take notes as a former police officer of decades? You don't take detailed notes on your meetings?
I've always been very careful in carrying any notes or paper with respect to matters of significant confidence, and so I received the benefit of verbal briefings from officials, but I do not take and carry notes from those meetings.
Do your staff take or carry notes, sir?
And again, I don't have that information. I have no notes.
You don't
with
know
respect
if your stats take notes on your behalf at meetings? You don't know that, sir?
What I can tell you is I have no notes from those briefings. I attended those briefings.
I've now asked you if your staff have taken notes.
Well, I'll inquire, but I do not believe that, frankly, my staff have access to some of those confidential briefings of which I am privileged to attend.
Okay, so it wouldn't be in the binder that you have before you, none of those briefings, records of those detailed documents for the being able to refer to your notes to refresh your memory as you would have when you were.
No. Unfortunately, Mr. Green, I've gone through this book quite extensively, and none of those notes to which you refer are contained therein.
So, in a more official capacity, in the report to the House of Parliament under the Emergency Act consultations, it outlined your participation in several discussions in advance of the declaration. Is it your position that there are no notes pertaining to those discussions under the official consultations of the Emergency Act?
No, it's my position that I did not carry personal notes from any of those consultations or discussions. I can only speak to my own actions and notes that would be in my possession. I can't confirm for you.
You're the minister of your department, sir. You have staff. Respectfully, they are responsible to you. So then I would ask, given that you're not taking personal responsibility, will you take ministerial responsibility to provide this committee with any notes that were taken by anybody at the meetings pertaining to the Emergency Act consultations leading up to the invocation?
Yeah, respectfully, Mr. Green, I take full responsibility for my job as a minister and for my own conduct. And as I've advised you, and I've advised you quite forthrightly, that I attended a number of briefings. I did not personally take notes of those briefings, and I don't have those to share with you. I do have a recollection of those briefings, and which I am prepared as appropriate to share.
You heard my question, correct?
But your question was based on, quite frankly, a premise that was incorrect, and so I feel a need to correct that. If you want to modify your inquiry now,
I'll do it by way of a motion at a further date in a more formal way. Were there any military people involved in the operations pertaining to G20, sir?
To the best of my knowledge, no.
There was no military
I'm assuming you're referring to 2010's G20 that took place in the city of Toronto? Correct. Certainly not in any policing function or any function where there was direct contact with the public.
And I'm sure you're aware of aid to civil authority.
Can you hold that till next? Your time is up. Can you hold that to next round?
Sure can.
Thank you. Mr. Fortin, will you take the chair?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. I was wondering about that.
Mr. Green, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Minister, I've talked in the past about the juxtaposition between the different styles of policing. I've referenced what's gone on in the Wet'suwet'en with lethal overwatch. Today, we've talked about G20. In your opinion, how could you care to comment on the juxtaposition? How do you explain to Canadians that the folks who were protesting G20 were met with riot gears, kettling, mass suppressions of their charter rights, and the folks that were in Ottawa here essentially had the red carpet laid out? They were provided with provisions for off-site accommodations, and there was oftentimes actually the appearance of almost a collaboration between the police and the occupiers. Can you comment on the juxtaposition of those two states of policing in Canada?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question, and thank you, Mr. Green. I think it's important for us to understand the principle of proportionality in the response of the police. And as I've said, it is the responsibility of the police to uphold our charter, to facilitate lawful, peaceful protest. And when that protest becomes unlawful, then they have also a responsibility to uphold the law, but to do it in a way which uses minimal force.
So I'll stop you there. Okay, thank you for that.
Except your question does require a more fulsome answer. You can stop me.
Then you could provide it. You could provide it to us in writing if you'd like to. At the end, I have 2 minutes left. Chief Slawley said that there may not be a police solution to the demonstration, and then since stated that our institutions and police services were unprepared for the convoy. Do you agree with that assessment by the former chief of police?
I accept Chief Slawley's assessment that he was unprepared for what took place in Ottawa.
And as the minister responsible for emergency preparedness, what responsibility do you take for the unpreparedness of a mass movement protest at the nation's capital?
Yeah, thank you. And I would point out that Chief Slawley is accountable to his police services board and through the Ontario Police Services Act. Now,
as the minister responsible for emergency preparedness, ostensibly you would have protocols in place for blockades on major ports of entry and for the nation's capital. What responsibility do you take for the lack of preparedness leading to the events occurred during the occupation?
Actually, what we saw is that they didn't set up on federal land. They went to municipal land, and I think they were exploiting.
You wouldn't have protocols for the country as the minister responsible for emergency preparedness under anti-terrorism protocols or all the other things that came after Bill C-51? Are you saying that within your mandate letters, it is not your responsibility to be prepared to have a national plan for a state of emergency?
And there is, but not. This was not a terrorist event. To be very clear, Mr. Green, this was not a terrorist event. This was an illegal blockade. It was a criminal offense. In many of those places, it is the responsibility of the police of jurisdiction, and we support them.
So it didn't meet the threshold for your responsibility? It wouldn't meet the threshold for it being under your responsibility as an emergency? Is that what you're stating today on the record?
It evolved into a situation that constituted an emergency. It wasn't an emergency in its initial days. It was an enormously challenging and difficult public order problem for the police of jurisdiction here in Ottawa. As it manifested itself at borders, it became a more significant. It elevated to the level of, but it elevated at our borders to an issue of a national security threat and a threat against critical infrastructure.
Well, you acknowledge that you weren't prepared.
Mr. Green, your time is up. Senator